The wind came early that morning, not harsh, but persistent, like it was trying to wake the land from a long-held ache. It moved through brittle grasses and past sleeping jackrabbits, brushing the porch of a weathered ranch house that stood lonesome at the edge of the prairie. The boards creaked like they remembered laughter once, long ago, before the silences got so deep they felt like furniture. Inside, the man stirred. Tall, broad, worn by work, he moved with the quiet precision of someone who no longer expected to be watched. His name had once been spoken softly by a woman in a white dress. Now, it lived only on paper, land deeds, cattle registries, banknotes. Folks in town called him Mr. Hollis, out of habit, but most just said, "That rancher east of the ridge," the one who never stayed long in town and never came for the dances. He pulled on his coat, though the morning sun hadn't broken the chill yet. His boots struck the floorboards like they'd done 1,000 mornings before, and still the barn door stayed shut. Not out of forgetfulness, but something else. The barn held dust thick enough to silence memories. Ropes hung untouched. Harnesses cracked with time. The cradle he built by hand sat in one corner, half covered by a burlap sack, like even the past knew better than to speak loud. He fed the horses, checked the fences, mended the roof of the chicken coop. He did it all with the same steady rhythm, like a man trying to outrun stillness by working harder than time. But that morning, when the sun slipped low on the horizon and set the wheat fields to gold, he paused. Something inside him, perhaps the loneliness that clung heavier in the evenings, pulled him to town. Not for company. Just supplies, nails, lamp oil, coffee. But as he passed the cracked wall of the trading post, he did something he hadn't done in years. He reached for a nail, tore a piece of brown paper from the counter, and wrote 7 words in stiff, straight print. Help wanted. Barn work. Fair pay. East Ridge. He tacked it onto the weathered board, next to a notice for a lost mule and a reward for a stolen saddle. Then he left, not thinking much of it, not hoping, not fearing, just waiting to see if anything changed. Far on the other side of town, in a sagging one-room cabin just past the cottonwoods, a woman stirred beneath a sky pale with smoke. Her back ached from hauling water. Her hands raw from scrubbing diapers against stone. A baby slept in a wooden crate lined with hay, and 3 more children, 2 boys and a girl, sat around a tiny table, whispering a rhyme they half remembered. She wiped sweat from her brow and fed the fire a stick of wood too damp to burn clean. Her name used to mean something sweet. Folks once called her pretty. Now they called her nothing at all. Since her man vanished, left after the 4th baby with a note full of lies and a sack of borrowed coins, she'd learned to barter smiles for credit, pride for groceries, and silence for dignity. She never begged. But some days, when the youngest coughed too long or the rain found new leaks in the roof, she almost did. That morning, she walked the children to the creek to wash, then passed by the trading post on the way back. Her eyes, keen from habit, flicked to the board. She saw the notice, the one scrawled in sharp print, and stopped. Her hand hovered over it like touching the words might make them vanish. She looked back at her children, then forward again, reading each word twice. Barn work. Fair pay. She hesitated, then turned on her heel. The next morning, she rose early. Dressed in the cleanest calico she owned. Braided her daughter's hair and tucked an extra slice of cornbread into her skirt pocket. With the baby strapped to her chest and the others left under the eye of the oldest, she walked the 3 miles east. The ranch loomed like a ship run aground, wide, solemn, worn. She knocked once on the main house door, her hand trembling just slightly, and then waited. He opened it slow. Their eyes met, 2 storms quieted by years. He looked at her dress, her hands, her eyes. She looked past his silence and into the loneliness sitting behind it. She said softly, "I'm here for the work." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "You clean barns?" "I clean anything," she replied, voice steady. Asterisk pays $1 a day. "You start when you're ready." Asterisk. She nodded once, crisp. "After breakfast." They stood for a breath too long. Not distrustful, just unused to the shape of kindness spoken without need. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. He pulled a coin from his pocket and handed it to her. She took it without thanks. Not out of rudeness, but because it was work, not charity. He closed the door. She turned back toward her cabin, the coin clenched in her fist, like maybe she could buy more than food with it. Maybe she could buy time. Dignity. A day without choosing which child ate more. Behind the barn wall, mice scattered through straw. Dust rose in the morning light like smoke from an old wound. Neither of them knew yet what lived beneath that dust, or what could grow once it was cleared. But something had shifted. A door had opened. Not wide, but enough. And that was all Hope ever needed. He rode out at mid-morning, not because he doubted her, but because old habits don't unlearn themselves overnight. The barn door had stayed shut. No fresh tracks in the dirt. No scuff of boots or signs of sweeping. Just the same slow wind, the same whisper of prairie weeds brushing against the wooden siding like they, too, were waiting for movement. His horse crested the ridge above the cottonwoods, and from there he saw her home, if it could be called that. A leaning cabin stitched together with rusted nails and hope. Smoke lifted from the chimney, thin and unsure. Chickens pecked through the yard. A cracked tin bucket tipped sideways beneath the well. It looked like it might fold in on itself if the wind pushed too hard. He tied the reins to a split fence post and walked the rest of the way. At first, no one noticed. Then the screen door opened and a child burst through, barefoot, shirt askew, chasing a wooden hoop. Another child appeared, then another, their voices bright like songbirds in a land that rarely heard music. They called out names to each other that he didn't catch. And then she stepped out. Her skirt was damp from scrubbing, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair twisted up with a pencil holding it. There was flour on her hands. A baby rested on her hip, cheeks rosy from the fire inside. She met his eyes like she expected him to look away. He didn't. "You're late," she said, not cold, just firm, like someone who had too much life pressing against her to entertain small talk. "I figured you'd started," he answered. "I did. With my own chores first." He nodded once, just enough to acknowledge the balance of her world. She didn't owe him explanation. She owed no man anything but the truth. "You came to check?" she asked. "Just passing," he lied, and they both knew it. He watched her gather the children with the practiced ease of a general commanding an army too young to know how tired their leader really was. The eldest boy, barely 10, if that, dragged a sack of flour inside. The girl, thin as a switch and twice as quick, pulled the toddler away from the fire. None of them cried. None of them asked for anything. It struck him how loud the silence was among them. They lived with want like it was furniture. "You still want the work?" he asked. Her eyes flicked to the baby on her hip, then back to him. "Yes. I'll open the barn for you." She didn't smile. Just handed the baby to her daughter, wiped her hands on her apron, and followed him. The barn door groaned when it opened, like it hadn't stretched its hinges in years. Inside, dust hung in sunbeams, thick enough to write names in. Saddles lined the far wall, dry and cracked. Buckets, broken tools, a rocking chair with no seat, a stack of newspapers from years long dead. The air smelled of wood rot and old sorrow. She stood at the threshold for a long moment, then stepped inside. "You don't have to touch the back corner," he murmured, almost to himself. She didn't ask why. Just started on the front, brushing cobwebs from beams, stacking empty pails, dragging hay bales into the light. Her movements were neither hurried nor lazy. Just steady, like everything she did had to last longer than her strength allowed. He didn't offer help. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. It felt strange to see someone care for a space he had let decay. Stranger still to feel something stir, as she moved among things he'd once treasured and then tried to forget. At noon, he left and returned with a bucket of cold water and a piece of bread. She accepted the water, declined the bread, then broke it in half and stuffed the smaller piece in her pocket. "For them," she said. He didn't ask who. He already knew. In the following days, the routine held. She arrived each morning after chores, apron folded neatly, sleeves rolled. Sometimes the children followed, staying near the fence, playing in dirt, pointing at the horses. Once, he let the youngest feed a foal from his palm. The child squealed in delight. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on that moment longer than most. He started leaving small things where she might find them. A tin of molasses. A coil of rope. A fresh pair of gloves, worn but warm. She left no notes, no words. Just a fresh loaf of cornbread in his mailbox one morning, wrapped in cloth that smelled faintly of smoke and rosemary. He found himself rising earlier, walking out to the barn before she arrived, brushing the dust off the workbench, clearing paths without thinking. Her presence had begun to press against the stillness of his world, like a warm breath on a cold mirror. But she never spoke of her children's father, and he never asked. She never asked why the cradle sat in the corner untouched, and he never offered. Their silences matched. Not empty, just respectful, like two travelers walking beside each other without needing to hold hands to know they were no longer alone. One afternoon, rain rolled across the fields. She kept working. He stood beneath the overhang, watching the lines of water sketch paths down the windows. The wind smelled like soil waking up. She wiped her brow, leaned against a beam, and said, mostly to herself, "It's a good barn." He looked at her, not the barn. "Hadn't been for a long time." She met his gaze. "It is now." There was nothing romantic in her voice. Nothing coaxing. Just a plain truth spoken by someone who knew what it meant to build from nothing. He nodded. She turned back to the broom. That night, long after the last sweep of bristles had faded into memory, he sat by the fire. The barn smelled faintly of lavender and ash. He could still hear the soft scrape of her shoes against the wood. He could still feel something unspoken passing between them, too fragile for words, too real to ignore. And for the first time in years, he didn't dread the morning. He waited for it. By the time the first frost kissed the fields, the barn had changed. It wasn't just cleaner, it breathed again. Sunlight filtered in through the east-facing slats in the morning, landing on the smooth board she'd scrubbed by hand, the saddle wall now straightened and dustless. The cradle in the corner had stayed untouched, but even it seemed to sit easier, no longer a monument to grief but something waiting for forgiveness. She came each day, her children trailing like shadows at first, then like saplings growing toward warmth. The oldest boy, quiet and sharp-eyed, took to fetching water for her. The girl stitched up a curtain from old cloth, tacking it to the barn's broken window with twine and buttons. Even the littlest, barely steady on his feet, found joy chasing chickens across the yard while she swept. They never lingered too close to him, those children. But they watched. And he let them. Once, the middle child, 7 or 8, missing his front teeth, wandered toward the corral. The rancher spotted him staring through the fence, eyes locked on the youngest colt. Without a word, he opened the gate, lifted the boy gently, and placed him on the fence rail. The child's fingers curled tight around the wood, but his smile came wide and sudden. She saw the moment from the barn door, her hands still on the rake. Her expression didn't change much, but her shoulders lowered, and something in her face softened, as if she'd spent months expecting this world to break again, and it hadn't. He didn't say he liked the children. Didn't need to. They kept coming. Sometimes they stayed past sundown, sitting near the porch as she helped string beans or mend socks. She'd begun bringing small baskets of her own, cornbread, pickled carrots, rough-cut apples. He cleared a space for them in his pantry without a word. When she swept the barn now, he swept too. When she hammered a nail, he held the board. Their work became a kind of language, quiet, sure, forgiving. But they never crossed certain lines. Not yet. He didn't ask why her husband left. She didn't ask what waited behind the closed door in his home, the one with the rocking chair that hadn't moved in years. They moved in rhythm around old pain, like dancers who knew not to step too close to the edge. One gray morning she arrived late. No children. No basket. Her eyes were tired, and her hands shook slightly as she lifted the broom. He noticed. Everything all right? She hesitated, then nodded. Just a fever. The baby's teeth coming in. Been up all night. He brought out a tin of willow bark and a jar of honey. She accepted both with a faint smile, one corner of her mouth lifting. Didn't think you kept honey, she murmured. Don't like sweet, he replied, then added after a pause. Not until lately. She said nothing, but she stood there a while longer, her fingers warming the jar. Something lingered in the air between them. Not heat. Not fire. Just that slow, tender pull of two people who had spent too many winters alone. In town, their quiet companionship had begun to stir talk. Whispers drifted from the trading post to the church pews. How the rancher was letting a woman with 4 mouths hang around his place. How she must be working more than just barns to stay so long. One man, half drunk and bitter, called her a squatter with pretty eyes. The rancher heard it. He didn't raise a fist. Just stepped close enough for the man to back down on his own. Later that evening, when she asked why his knuckles were scraped, he only said, "Old gate hinge," and she didn't press further. She just offered him salve and silence. The next day, she knocked on his door. Not the barn. Not the porch. The door. He opened it, surprised to see her without the children. She looked smaller without them. Tired in a way that reached deep beneath her skin. She stood still, then said quietly, "I can't keep doing this if I'm pretending I'm just hired help. I won't let them believe something that ain't real. They're not used to men staying." He didn't answer right away. The wind rustled through the trees behind her. She held her coat closed against the chill. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." She didn't move at first. Then she crossed the threshold. Inside, the house was clean but spare. A kettle warmed on the stove. A half-carved piece of wood rested on the table. The place smelled like cedar and tobacco and something faintly floral. Her soap, maybe, from the linen she'd given him last week. She didn't sit. Just looked around. "You live like someone who stopped expecting guests," she said. "I did." She turned to face him. "Are we guests or something else?" He took a breath, like he'd been waiting years to say it without being asked. "I don't know what we are yet. But I know I wait for your voice in the morning. And I listen for your children's feet. And when the barn's empty, I miss the sound of your broom." She looked down, tears catching in the hollows of her eyes before she could hide them. "I ain't asking for charity," she whispered. "I know," he said. "You never have." A long silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, just wide enough to hold everything they couldn't say yet. Finally, she turned to the door. "I'll be back in the morning." He nodded. "I'll leave the porch lamp on." And when she returned the next day, the light was waiting. So were 4 wooden bowls on the table. So was a warm loaf of bread. So was the quiet kind of hope that doesn't need a name yet, just time, and a place to grow. By the end of that week, the children began calling the ranch not his place, but the big house. They said it like it was somewhere good, not grand. She never corrected them. And he didn't either. The first snow came silent, drifting like feathers across the brown hills, softening the jagged skeletons of bare trees and smoothing the rough boards of the barn she had cleaned with her own 2 hands. It blanketed the quiet world they had built between them, as if giving permission to rest. Smoke trailed upward from the ranch house chimney, and inside, the stillness was no longer hollow. It was filled with breath and soft clatter, children's murmurs, the scrape of a spoon against a worn pot. They hadn't spoken aloud of living arrangements. She still kept the cabin, still returned some nights when the weather held or when one of the children longed for what they'd always known. But more and more, their boots landed on his porch come evening, wet from snow or dust, their laughter echoing faintly as they piled inside. He made room for them without ceremony, cleared a space near the fire, hung hooks for small coats, placed a second kettle on the stove. Not once did he ask for anything in return. She noticed it all, the small ways he made space. The way he learned which child wouldn't eat carrots, which one needed a lullaby hummed under his breath to fall asleep. She caught him carving wooden animals for the youngest, saw him teaching her eldest to mend leather straps. It unsettled her, the gentleness of it. Not because she didn't want it, but because she did, and wanting something had never led to keeping it. One night, as the snow thickened and wind whipped like something grieving, she stood by the fire long after the others had gone to bed. He sat in his chair, carving another toy, his fingers worn but steady, the curl of wood falling like ribbons to the floor. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was thin and low. "They ask if you're their pa now." He paused. Set the carving down. "What do you tell them?" "I tell them no one can take that title until they choose it for themselves. And even then, it's not for me to say." He nodded, eyes still on the fire. "Do you want them to?" "I don't know," she admitted, folding her arms. "Some nights I think yes. Others, I remember how fast men leave when things get hard. I'm not most men." "I know," she said. And it was the truth that frightened her most. Later that week, a preacher rode in from one town over, stopping at the trading post to deliver letters and news. He made his way to the ranch, hat in hand, boots stiff with road dust. Sat in the kitchen with the rancher while the children played outside, his voice smooth but firm. "Folks are talking. Wondering what's going on out here. A woman unmarried, with children under a man's roof. That sort of thing invites trouble." The rancher sipped his coffee unbothered. "We ain't inviting anyone. Still, might be time to think about what's proper. About appearances." He leaned back, eyes steady. "I'm not raising children by rumor. If folks got eyes, let them see kindness. That's all that's happening here." The preacher left, dissatisfied. But the rancher didn't tell her about the visit until days later, when she found the man's handkerchief folded in the kitchen drawer and asked where it came from. When he told her, her face went blank. "I knew it would come," she whispered. "It always does." "I'm not ashamed," he said. "Not of you. Not of them." She looked at him long, then nodded. But he could feel the walls going up again. The way she moved more quietly, folded the laundry with her back turned, began packing baskets again as if the cabin was calling her back. He waited. Didn't press. But one evening, he rode by the old place and saw a lantern burning through the window. She was inside, alone, sitting at the table with a mended blanket in her lap. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of something unspeakable. He dismounted, knocked gently, and stepped in when she didn't answer. She didn't lift her head. "I thought if I came back here," she murmured, "I could remember how to be alone again." "You don't have to remember that," he said. "You already know how. The harder thing is learning how not to be." She looked up at him then, eyes shining with everything she hadn't said. "I just don't want to depend on someone who might wake up one day and find the silence more comforting than the noise we bring. I've lived with silence," he said. "It's cold company." The fire cracked softly. He stepped closer. "I buried a child once," he said, voice rough with memory. "Little boy. Born too early. We held him for 5 days. 5 days was enough to name him. Enough to dream. Enough to lose everything when he left." She said nothing, only listened, her heart straining beneath his words. "After that, I buried everything else too. My voice. My home. I let dust take what was left." She touched his hand then, fingers light as breath. "And now? Now there's light again. In my barn. In my house. In my hands." The wind howled outside, cruel and hungry, but inside, it was warm. They sat like that for a long time, not as man and woman, not even as lovers, but as people who knew what it meant to carry pain and still choose to build something with what remained. By the end of the week, she brought the children back with her. Not because he asked. Not because they needed charity. But because the porch light was on. Because the door opened without question. Because the floor creaked like it remembered laughter again. And on the first Sunday of December, as snow fell like powdered sugar from a forgiving sky, she placed her hand in his and said, "We'll figure it out." He nodded, quiet and steady. "We already are." The thaw came late that year, as if winter had decided to linger out of stubbornness, reluctant to surrender the hush it had blanketed across the land. Snow melted in uneven patches, revealing the brown bones of earth beneath, the outlines of things buried too long. The fields, still brittle from frost, whispered of something coming back to life, but slowly, cautiously, as if unsure it would be welcome. The ranch, too, had changed with the season. Not in grand gestures or bold signs, but in quiet ways. The porch now held a second rocking chair. The windows, once dust-filmed and lonely, were scrubbed clean by small hands eager to see the world. The barn door no longer creaked when opened. And inside, lying neatly along the wall, stood 4 little wooden stools, the kind made for short legs and soft laughter. He moved through the days with a different rhythm now. Not rushed. Not careful. Just present. He began to speak more often, not because the silence bothered him, but because he found comfort in her responses. They shared small things, comments on the weather, the stubborn mule, the way the youngest boy had a laugh that shook his whole body like thunder in a teacup. It wasn't love declared aloud. It was love in practice. In showing up. In staying late. In knowing when to leave a coat by the door without being asked. Still, either had spoken the words. Not because they feared them, but because they knew better than to rush something sacred. The heart builds slow when it's been broken before. And between the two of them lay enough splintered history to fill a dozen barns. One morning, with spring still teasing from the edges of the wind, the eldest boy came into the barn alone. He looked different that day, older somehow, shoulders squared, eyes carrying something too heavy for his age. He walked up to the rancher, who was oiling a bridle, and stood quiet for a time before asking, "Are you gonna marry my ma?" The question was not said with defiance or need. Just curiosity. A child trying to fit the world into shapes that made sense. He set the bridle down. Wiped his hands slow. "I don't know," he answered truthfully. The boy nodded. "She's scared. I think she wants to, but she won't if she thinks it'll break us again." The man looked at the boy, not just at his face, but into it. The way you look at someone who carries echoes of another life. "I won't break her," he said. The boy paused, then smiled. Not wide. But enough. That evening, she found the boy asleep on the porch, curled up with a blanket around his shoulders. She carried him inside, brushed the hair from his forehead, and whispered thanks to no one in particular. Then she walked to the barn, where the lamp still burned. He was there, of course. Finishing repairs on a wheelbarrow, his hands steady even in the low light. "He asked you, didn't he?" she said softly, arms folded. He nodded once. "He's brave." "So are you," she said, and the truth of it made her voice tremble. She stepped closer, the air between them warm with sawdust and quiet. "I don't need a ceremony," she whispered. "I just need to know this isn't something that can be taken again." He looked at her then, not like a man about to make a promise, but like one who already had, and had been keeping it long before she noticed. "It can't be taken," he said. "It was never borrowed. It's ours." The days turned greener after that. Wild flowers pushed up from the thawed earth. The children ran barefoot again. The chickens laid more eggs. And the barn, oh, the barn, was no longer a place for sorrow. It became a workshop, a playhouse, a refuge. It echoed with new sounds, laughter, hammering, the soft strumming of an old guitar he hadn't touched in years. Still, the town remained cautious. Some eyes watched with narrow judgment. Some lips whispered behind palms. One afternoon, at the general store, a woman she barely knew asked her if she thought it was wise, tying herself to a man like that, with a past so heavy, a heart so closed off. She smiled, not defensive, just tired of explaining what only the heart can know. "He's not closed," she said gently. "He's just quiet. And the quietest ones love the loudest when they finally do." And he did love. Not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with presence. With the way he rose early to warm the stove before the children stirred. The way he fixed her favorite mug when it cracked. The way he placed the cradle, once covered in sorrow, now freshly sanded and clean, by the fire where she sat rocking her niece's baby when they visited. One night thunder rolled in from the south. Rain came heavy, flooding low fields and churning the creek near her old cabin. She panicked. Told him she had to go. There were still some things in that house, keepsakes, drawings, the last of her mother's linens. Before she finished the sentence, he was saddled up. They rode together into the storm, water soaking through to their skin, the path slippery and dark. When they reached the cabin, the creek was already breaching its banks. Inside, the floor was wet. The drawings ruined. She stood there, heart breaking all over again. "I should have let it go," she said. "It's just things. Just—" He stepped behind her, laid a hand on her back. "It's memory," he said. "And memory is never just a thing." They stood in the rain-slicked silence until the water receded. When they returned, he carried what he could. But she carried something else, grief that had been met with gentleness. Loss that had been witnessed, not solved. In the weeks that followed, she began planting roots more visibly. Her apron hung by his door. The children began calling him Pa, without asking if it was all right. And one morning, she took off the ring she no longer wore and set it in a small wooden box. She didn't bury it. She just put it away. That evening, he carved something new. A sign. He nailed it above the barn door without ceremony. When she saw it the next morning, her breath caught. For the children. No names. No claim. Just a truth carved in wood. What they were building was for more than themselves. And as the wind moved across the plains, warm and sure, the old narrator's voice returned, soft as a page turning. Some love don't arrive in thunder. It don't kick doors down or shout from rooftops. Some love comes as a knock at the back door, a bowl of soup, a barn cleaned by hands that could have left but didn't. It comes slow, like spring. But when it comes, it stays. Because the heart, when it's ready, don't just rebuild. It reclaims.